In the world of fitness and rehab, we are absolutely obsessed with perfect form. We get told over and over that there's one right way to move, and if you deviate from that, well, you're doing it wrong and you're going to get hurt. But what if one of the most common things we're told to fix, our so-called bad knees, isn't really a flaw at all?
I mean, of course you have, right? It's probably one of the most common cues you'll ever hear from a personal trainer, a physical therapist, maybe even some coach on YouTube. The whole idea is to stop your knees from caving inward, a movement that we've all been taught is dangerous. But why? Is that fear actually based in reality?
For a really long time, the thinking on this was pretty simple. You measure an angle while a person is just standing there, and if that angle is outside the quote-unquote normal range, then you've got a problem. But as we're about to find out, the human body in motion is just way, way too complex for such a simple ruler. Okay, so to get to the bottom of this whole thing, we've got to understand two key ideas. Over here on the left, we have the old school approach, the static Q angle. That's a measurement taken while you're just standing still. And on the right, we've got dynamic knee valgus, which you might know as knee caving. That's what happens when you're actually moving, like jumping or squatting. Let's dig into why one of these has totally fallen out of favor and why the other is not nearly as simple as it looks. All right, first up, let's talk about this classic measurement, the Q angle. It's dominated how people think about knees for years, and we're going to see exactly why modern research says it's time to let it go. So what even is the Q angle? Well, the Q stands for quadriceps, and it's supposed to represent the angle of pull from your big thigh muscle on your kneecap. Basically, someone draws a line from your hip down to your kneecap, and another one from your shin bone up to your kneecap. The angle where those two lines meet, that's your Q angle. Sounds simple enough. And for years, this one little measurement carried a ton of weight. I mean, clinicians used it for everything: to diagnose knee pain, to predict who is going to get injured, and to decide on treatment plans. If your angle was considered too big or too small, that was a huge red flag. But here is where it all falls apart. A big 2022 review by Skouras and colleagues just picked it to pieces. For starters, it's not even reliable. You can have two different experts measure the same person and get two different numbers. More importantly, it can't tell the difference between people who have knee pain and people who don't. Plus, the second you start to move, that angle changes constantly, which makes the static measurement pretty much useless for dynamic activities. The researchers, well, they didn't pull any punches. Their conclusion was blunt. The static Q angle just doesn't have any real meaning or use when we're talking about actual movement. It's a dead end. So naturally, the focus had to shift from how your knee looks when it's still to how it behaves when it moves.
And this shift brings us to what people now consider the better way to look at knee mechanics: watching the knee in action. Dynamic knee valgus, or DKV for short, is that inward knee motion we're always warned about. But what's really interesting here is that it's not just a knee thing. It's this complex stance between your hip, your thigh bone, your shin bone, even your ankle. It's your whole leg's strategy for dealing with force. So because we can actually see DKV happen when someone moves, it feels like a much better way to spot a movement fault. Your knee caves in, you're moving wrong, case closed. Or is it? This is where the whole story takes a really fascinating twist. The latest research is asking a pretty revolutionary question. How much of that knee cave is something you're actually doing wrong, and how much of it is just the way you're built? So to answer that, a recent study by DeWald and his colleagues did something really clever. They came up with two different definitions. First, there's observed DKV. That's just the total amount of knee cave a coach or a therapist can see. But then there's true DKV. That's the amount of knee cave that's left after you subtract the person's natural, static, unchangeable knee angle. It separates the anatomy from the actual movement. Okay, check this out. When the researchers measured observed DKV, again, that's just what you see with your eyes, they found what lots of people have seen before. On average, females showed more knee valgus, almost 15 degrees, compared to males who were around 11 degrees. And this has often been used to try and explain why women might have higher rates of certain knee injuries. But then, and this is the absolute kicker, they calculated the true DKV. They stripped out the influence of everyone's unique anatomy, and what did they find? The difference completely vanished. The actual amount of movement into valgus was practically identical between men and women. Both were just a little over 3 degrees. I mean, this is a total game changer. Let that sink in. It means that a huge chunk of what we've been calling a bad movement pattern or a technical flaw is really just a reflection of someone's individual bone structure.
you're not necessarily moving wrong. You're just moving in the body that you have. And if you need more proof, just look at this chart from the study. It confirms that direct link. Each of those dots is a person, and you can see a clear trend. The more static knee valgus someone has just standing there, the more dynamic valgus they show when they jump. Their anatomy is literally predicting their movement pattern.
So with all that said, what does this actually mean for us? How should we be thinking about our knees, about preventing injury, about performance, now that we have this new information? Here's the new playbook. First, we just have to let go of these outdated, unreliable, static measurements like the Q angle. Second, and this is the really big one, we have to start seeing movement through the lens of individual anatomy. And third, our focus needs to shift away from hitting some perfect arbitrary angle and onto how well a person actually controls their movement and performs.
This completely changes the goal of training and rehab. We have got to stop chasing this one-size-fits-all, cookie-cutter ideal of perfect form. Think about it. Forcing someone who has a wider pelvis and naturally more valgus to shove their knees out might actually be putting them in a weaker, less stable position for their body.
So the next time you see a knee drift inward a little bit during a squat, maybe the first question shouldn't be, is that bad? Maybe the better question is that movement controlled? Does it look efficient? Is the person strong, and are they pain-free? Because what you might be seeing isn't a flaw that needs to be fixed at all, but simply the unique signature of their own anatomy in motion.